Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net doing a new site podcast. This week we're going to be talking about Dead Rising from Capcom. Yes, what are we going to say about this particular series? It kind of brought a new flavor to the zombie genre, basically, and I kind of like that a lot, actually. At this point, I think zombies were really starting to really take off in games. While they had always been a staple of the gaming industry, like, you know, original Resident Evils and stuff like that. The zombies had a bit of a resurgence following the release of the remake of Dawn of the Dead. A lot of zombie movies were coming out after that. What else was happening? The Resident Evil movies were coming out. George Romero was making zombie movies again. Zombies were really starting to get a bit of a resurgence in a lot of different mediums. And because of that, video games were basically doing zombie games. A lot of video games were doing zombie games. But when all of these different companies are doing all of these different types, are all working on the same genre, eventually it has a problem of getting a bit stale. I know right now nobody's doing World War II video games really that much anymore. Now everybody's doing, and the problem was with that, by the point it hit its peak, World War II, like a lot of these games, you could pretty much you couldn't differentiate themselves. Like it got to a point where you couldn't tell this World War II shooter from this World War II shooter. It just got very difficult. Dead Rising, while it was releasing at a very, very strong time in the zombie, in the zombie hype era, you could tell that game. Capcom had put a specific twist on it. Well, what do you say we start talking about it a bit deeper? I like to talk a bit in these podcast series about my personal experiences with a particular franchise as well as its history. And I usually end the podcast with where I think the future is going with this particular series. As such, I have quite a bit of personal information to talk about this game. I've played them, that sort of thing. But I have a lot of, there are some personal experiences between me and Dead Rising that actually make this a franchise that is quite close to my heart, especially for a new franchise. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually the franchises that are close to my heart are franchises that have been around for probably 10 plus years. So I first became aware of Dead Rising around the time that Capcom released the demo for Dead Rising on the Xbox Live Marketplace. I think the first people I read that the demo had been released from was probably the Penny Arcade guys. I think the guys at Penny Arcade were talking about the demo on their website, just during a news post or something like that. The game hadn't come out yet. The demo was an early release. And they were talking a bit about it and about what they could do with it and how much fun that they were having playing it. And I thought that was kind of interesting. The last time I think that I downloaded a demo based on Penny Arcade's recommendation was Indigo Prophecy, or Fahrenheit for you Brits. And I think that because of that, I really liked that demo. And I really liked the final version of that game, so there was certainly an incentive for me to at least check out the demo. So I started downloading it. This was about a year into the Xbox 360's lifespan. I did not have a PlayStation 3 at the time. I don't know if they were out yet. Because the Xbox, people don't like to talk about this because nowadays everything been released since 2008 has pretty much, if it's come to Xbox 360, unless it's a first party game, will come to the Xbox 360, the PC, and the PS3 all at the same time or around the same time. At that time, there were a few games that were not coming to any platform other than the Xbox 360. This might have been because of the 1 year lead time on the 360, or platform exclusivity or something along those lines. But the original Saints Row, for example, was a 360 exclusive. It was not. Has not to this day been released on any other platform. And the original Dead Rising was Xbox 360 exclusive. This was just before I suffered my classic Red Rings of Death. My first Red Rings of Death on my. It took 4 months for my Red Rings of Death to start happening. So my Xbox 360 was still in perfect working order. So I downloaded. I downloaded the demo. And immediately when I loaded it up, I was drawing parallels to Dawn of the Dead. Here was a game where you're fighting zombies in a mall. The difference between this and Dawn of the Dead was that the zombies were actually inside the mall. I thought the graphics looked phenomenal. I mean, I thought it was a good-looking game. I thought the high-resolution cutscenes, and I remember playing this just on a regular SD TV. But I remember when I finally started looking at it on an HD TV, just being so unbearably impressed on how good the game looked in SD and HD. The text was a little hard to read on an SD TV, and they never fixed that. But that aside, the graphics looked great. The character models I thought looked great. The zombies looked a little bad, but then again, there were about a gazillion of them. I mean, I was just shocked. So I load up the demo. I move from one part of the screen to another. Probably less than, 15 seconds of gameplay. And I trigger a cutscene and the game is over. And I thought, well, what just happened? The demo's over this fast? And then I realized, I loaded it back up and I started fighting the zombies. And then I moved to a different area. And a different cutscene triggered. And the demo ended. And after playing it, I think a third time, I realized, oh, you fool. There are different cutscenes if you enact different loads. What you got to do is you got to screw around in the area or something like that. So I did that, and after a while, like maybe about a few minutes of me fighting zombies and having a blast, another cutscene triggered and the demo ended. So it was timed. If you ask me, maybe not the best way to go about a demo, but probably for the way the game was being told, the most practical way. Still, the gameplay itself was really, really, really fun and certainly merited a purchase, I thought. I was really intrigued. I wanted to play more. So, at that point in time, if I remember correctly, I was going to take a vacation down to Florida. So at around the same time of me being down in Florida, Dead Rising got released. I wasn't able to pick it up at launch. While I was down in Florida, I still kept tabs on what was going on the web while I was enjoying Florida. And the TV was airing this Dead Rising commercial that was pretty interesting. And unfortunately, I think they've taken it off Xbox Live. It actually used to be on Xbox Live. You could download it, but I think they took it off. And it was a live-action trailer that took place in a mall, and a pair of hands is grabbing different tools from a hardware shop. And the mall is, in the live-action plates are empty, which is kind of spooky. And then it cuts between that and gameplay, which I thought was kind of cool. It was an interesting way to sell the game. I mean, Dead Rising is literally zombies in a mall. So you show a mall, you show zombies, you show that fact that you could use power tools to kill them, as well as weapons, and boom, you've got yourself like a TV spot. Well, it really wanted me to be like, okay, ready to go home now, go pick up and play this game. So that happened. The second thing that happened was at the same time, that whole week that I was in Florida, Penny Arcade was doing a special 6-part series to kind of commemorate the the Dead Rising release. I don't know if they did this on behalf of Dead Rising's production studio or just because Dead Rising was coming out and it was the summer and there wasn't a lot of other stuff coming out at the time, which happens. But they did like a 5 or 6 part comic strip, which was still pretty funny. It was like a I think it was called Penny Arcade Armageddon or something like that. And it showed them that the basic plot line of the Penny Arcade strip was that they go to a mall to pick up Dead Rising and the mall is full of zombies. And Gabe and Tycho are trying to fight zombies. Anarchy and her then boyfriend Galahad were fighting zombies. Frank, the store manager Frank, had his moment to finally shine. And the people in the Apple store didn't give a shit. They were more interested in Leopard. In fact, Frank nearly shot them because he thought all the Leopard fanatics that were cooing over the new operating system or the new Mac OS X point revision were zombies. They had to be told by Charles, no, don't shoot them, don't shoot them. They're not zombies. They're just Apple lovers. It was a great little mini series. I thought it was a great way to commemorate the launch. I don't think Penny Arcade ever really did. I mean, I know they've certainly done other like multiple part strips for game releases if they're commissioned to. I think they did. They've done them for a whole bunch of different games, but I don't think they've ever done something like that. That was like a multi-part story arc over the course of a week that used their own characters or was inspired by a game like that. I have noticed that recently they've been doing a lot of Pokemon strips because of the release of X and Y recently at the time this podcast is being recorded. But I haven't seen any, but there was no continuity between them. It was just, a joke here and a joke here and a joke here, basically. This was a multi-part story arc that had a cohesive story, a beginning, middle, and end. And my personal favorite moments were probably seeing Anarchy fight zombies with a batleth as she breaks up with... I really liked when the things were going on. I thought it was a really funny series, and I just love at the very end when they said that, and Tycho just responds with the word exquisite. Like he was really, really happy that Anarchy, his niece, was no longer dating somebody. Anyways, it was a funny series, and after about a week, and, around the time that series ended, it was around the time that I got back home from Florida. And the first thing that I wanted to do was pick up a copy of Dead Rising. I think I went out with Twitch, actually, as soon as I got back. And ironically enough, GameStop was on my bad list at that time. Because of a bad experience I had picking up a copy of Metal Gear Solid 3. This was probably a year earlier or something, and I could not for the life of me get a decent quality copy of Metal Gear Solid 3 from any GameStop I went to. All the copies that I would be getting from them were all scratched badly. And they were charging me the exact same price new as anything else. The discs were scratched. They were wrecked. They were unplayable. And they wouldn't give me a refund for them. The best they do is give me a gift card. And so at that point, I was kind of angry at GameStop for that. And I really didn't want to buy a new copy of Dead Rising from GameStop. Well, at that time, they were kind of the only game in town, basically, to go to. I don't think there wasn't really a Best Buy in my area, or there certainly wasn't a Target in my area that I could go to go pick up a copy of it. So it just so happened that after I got back from Florida, Twitch and I were in a mall hanging out, and they had indeed had copies of Dead Rising, which were sealed, completely sealed, with the factory sticker still on them. I couldn't believe it. I figured they would have torn those open and scratched them up pretty good before they resealed them and sold them to me. But apparently, from what the clerks told me, they must have just gotten that lot in. And because of that, they weren't damaged in any way. The clerks hadn't opened them. So I picked up a copy, and Twitch and I got to finally play it. I brought it home. I sped it up, and I started playing it. And the first thing that wowed me was I really liked the graphics, and I really liked the story. I thought it had a really interesting opening. I thought it was pretty fun, and I wanted to play more and more. until I realized within a couple of minutes of starting to play that I was on the clock and that the whole game was on the clock. I hate countdown clocks. I really do. I've always hated countdown clocks. I've always hated timed missions and things like that. I think a lot of people do. I really do. And probably by the time that, in the first day when nightfall fell, and I was basically trying to rescue civilians, and I'd be going up the guys in a jeep with a machine gun turret, and I didn't have any decent weapons to fight against them, to use to fight them, and they were killing my the people I was escorting around. Needless to say, I was not happy about that. I really wasn't. So I ended up shelving the game. I mean, I know I could have reset it, but I don't know. I could have reset it, and in fact, I actually tried. I tried resetting it a few times, and I got better at it the more I played. But there just got to be a point where probably around the beginning of the second day or something like that, when I just be like, I can't. I just can't play this anymore. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in a bad spot. I've got no access to weapons. My health is too low. I can't save the people that I want to in time, and I really don't want to reset again. So I gave up, and I put the game on a shelf, and I just left it on a shelf for a while. And I was really disappointed because I figured, I really liked the game's environment. I really liked the game's story. I really liked the fact that you could do with it. Like, you could pick up anything and use it as a weapon against zombies and stuff like that. But the whole fact of the timed missions and along with the bosses and the escort missions and everything else, it just wasn't a fun experience for me. And I put it on a shelf. Some time passed, and I don't know, I started doing more research on, game tips and strategies and stuff like that. And I kind of determined after a while, I might be able to get back to playing it. I might be able to try it again at least. And I leveled up my guy a bit more. I took my leveled up character that I already had, and I restarted the game again. And this time I decided just to play for play's sake. Do whatever I could, but just play and try to finish the story and try to get the best possible ending. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the way the first Dead Rising game plays out, I'll explain it to you. The first game takes place over the course of 72 in-game hours, which is, it's not really 72 hours. I forget how many seconds is in a minute in the game, maybe like 30 seconds, maybe like 10 seconds to a minute. I can't remember exactly, but it's actually like not that long. And within that time frame, you have missions that you need to complete, and there are also side missions that you can do, whether it be rescuing people or fighting the psychopaths. There are some psychopaths that you have to save. There are some missions that you have to do, but you're really under no obligation to do them. You're just not. You're not, basically what you are under an obligation to do is to play the game within the time frame. Depending upon if you completed the missions, depending upon how many of the in-game missions you had completed, and if you actually were at the end of the game able to make it to the launch pad in time and to be evacuated, would depend upon which ending you got. The best way to complete the game would be to complete all in-game missions, make it to Isabella's, and then be in Isabella's loft or something like that, about 2 in-game hours before the helicopter lands, and then go from there straight to the helipad. There's nothing, in between. You have like some time, basically. Like, I think it's 2 in-game hours or so to make it to the helipad from there. But by that point, all the zombies will be gone. There are a few psychopaths that you have to beat, but for the most part, you don't really have to do the side missions. it doesn't really affect the game's story. You can choose to do escort missions. They may help you out, get you specific weapons or help you level up or something. But for the most part, they're not required to do. There are some that are. But for the most part, there really aren't. I think there's like at least 10 psychopaths in the game, and you only need to beat like I think 2 of them or so. So if you're able to complete all of the in-game missions, required missions, and make it to the helipad within time, that unlocks the best ending. Which basically, if you have any other ending other than the best ending, the game ends and that's the end of it. You get your ending and that's it. But if you get the best ending, that unlocks overtime mode, which gives you an extra 24 hours and a second story to play. I don't really want to go too deep into spoilers for what you have to do over this thing. Needless to say, there are no side missions in it. You just have the main goal to complete, and after that, you have a big boss fight, a really difficult boss fight to beat. I think I can't remember what I was doing at around that time, but I specifically remember that I was doing a gym class in college at that time, and I remember that last psychopath being really annoying to fight because you don't have any weapons and you have to fight him hand to hand. The problem is you can't use conventional hand to hand attacks against him because he's faster than you. You have to use special attacks like the spinning, fist punch and the flying kick and stuff like that. You have to time those perfectly. Otherwise, they'll miss them and he'll attack you. Or it's a difficult boss fight, but not for the right reasons. Basically, it was an annoying boss fight. And if you fell or got knocked over, there were waves of zombies all around you that could impact your health. Not really the most fun of a boss fight, but by this point in the game, I really needed to see how the game ended. I really needed to bring up that ending. I invested so much time into playing the game, I really wanted to finish the game. And that's exactly what I did. I finally beat it, and at the very end, it has this very ubiquitous kind of almost like we don't know really what the ending is. Frank West starts seething and stuff like that, and we don't know, is he a zombie now or is he not a zombie, that sort of thing. Overall, I really like the game's story. With the exception of some of the gameplay choices, I thought the gameplay story really worked. I didn't like the fact that they chose to make the game in real time. I think that they still could have told the same story without having to submit to that. But I like the open world environment. You could explore the whole mall. You can explore the mall grounds. You can explore the mall undergrounds. There were a few vehicles that you could screw around with in certain areas. There were weapons everywhere that you could make use of. Some worked better than others, but for the most, there were certain achievements for doing silly things like putting silly hats on the zombies and that sort of thing. You could try anything on. You could even dresses and stuff like that. So you could cross dress if you wanted to. You could be in your underwear and just suspenders. You could change shoes. I really liked the characters I really liked all the main characters. I liked Jesse. I liked Carlito. I liked Isabella. I really thought they were really a lot of fun. And I liked the moral story that they were trying to tell in the game. That the moral story was that zombies basically ended up as an accident, but it was an accident being caused by human consumption, or by the necessity. It was like a necessity because of human consumption. And I remember specifically a couple of years ago, they were talking about allowing cloned beef to finally start hitting the shelves. And I guess the obvious thing is, I remember that there was when they made that announcement on one of the talk shows, there was a response from somebody who's like, "Did cattle stop having sex?" or something like that. He used more vulgar terms, but I think the whole idea was that we needed to create zombie beef, basically, or zombie cattle, to just to continue to feed our country, because of all the beef consumption that we currently have in this country. And on top of that, monument to consumerism, if you've ever been to a mall and you've looked around the mall, Aren't people just doing their thing? Doesn't that kind of almost make them zombies? You see the parallels there? You see the parallels? I think that's what the Japanese were trying to say. And I get that. And I liked it. I liked that the story not only was interesting to me, but the fact that the story worked on deeper levels is not something, and it told a moral story, is not something you usually see in video games. The worst that I've normally seen up to that point is war is hell. Okay. Is this right? Is this wrong? Is war right? Is war wrong? I've seen that in plenty of games. Metal Gear, focused on that a lot. And I understand that. I don't say that they're wrong for doing that. They were one of the first to do something like that. Before that, it was basically killing and guns. But I really like the fact of, okay, these zombies are here. Okay, they're horrible. But just like with Romero's movies up to that point, who were the bigger monsters? Was it the zombies, who you always knew where they stood, or the humans using this as an opportunity to just to bring in our worst fears? So who is worse, the zombies or us humans? So I like that. Sometime before and I kind of thought, well, it was an interesting game. It was a cool experiment. I'm glad I picked up a copy. But I think that's the end. I really can't see where they could go further from this. The story is over. It would be interesting if they made a sequel, but but I didn't think they would make a sequel. At that point, Capcom had shifted focus to the Lost Planet series, and where Dead Rising, for the most part, stayed at, like, I think it was like an Xbox 360 exclusive for quite a while. They didn't have a PC version. There wasn't a PS3 version. There were a lot of different versions of the original Lost Planet that were released. There were a lot of different versions of, so like it looked like to me that they were shifting all of the focus to make, the Lost Planet franchise, and Dead Rising was just an experiment or a small game. Which I was a little disappointed about, because I really liked Dead Rising a lot more than Lost Planet. I thought they were both interesting games, but personally for me, I like Dead Rising a lot more. So some time passes, and Dead Rising resurfaced. I can't remember exactly when Dead Rising resurfaced. I think it was 2010. And Capcom announced that they were going to be making Dead Rising 2 and it was going to be a multi-platform game for the PC, the Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3. Right away, I was interested. Here they basically said, you got a new main character named Chuck Green. He's a motocross expert. He's got a daughter that he's going to have to take care of. So that's immediately something kind of interesting right there. And the setting of the game will be not Las Vegas, but an analog of Las Vegas, basically. A city called Fortune City. So immediately a few things there they were basically saying we're going further with. One, new character, but that you'd be able to do more with him. Like he could, you could fashion weapons and stuff from items and stuff, and workbenches and stuff. Two, you'd have a daughter to care for, which could mean new things for the story. Three, we moved from a mall to Vegas. Or it's not really Vegas, but you get my meaning. All this stuff from Vegas is there. Immediately interested. It worked on many levels, but they kept a lot from us. They didn't answer the question of, well, what happened to Frank West? They didn't answer the question, what happened to Isabella? They didn't answer the question about, well, how is this zombie outbreak happening? What's the story behind that? They were very mum about that. And that was my interest, because I think that after playing through the first Dead Rising game, I was really excited about what the prospects were for what happened. I wanted to know, at the very end of the first game, Frank is seething after defeating the final boss. Is he a zombie? Is he not a zombie? What happens to him? What happened to him? That sort of thing. And unfortunately, they had no answers. I was going to have to just play the video game. So some time passes, and the ramp up to the game comes out. Capcom starts doing some really interesting things at press events, like administering, like they say that this whole new game is going to revolve around Zombrex, that there is finally a treatment for the zombie, for if you've been bitten, basically. There's a treatment that can prevent you from turning, as long as you administer it every 24 hours, basically. And if you don't administer it, you'll turn. There's no permanent cure, but there's at the very least a treatment, basically. And it was based off of what Isabella Keyes administered to Frank West at the end of the first Dead Rising game, if you played through to overtime. So that immediately interested me. So okay. Well, if Isabella Keyes had, if the original plans for Zombrex was based on Isabella Keyes' recipe, then possibly Isabella Keyes could still be alive. Possibly, if Zombrex is available, possibly even Frank West could still be alive. And also the fact that they were going to have multiplayer. I thought that was kind of interesting also, as well as in-game cooperative play. All of these are great positives. Leading up to the game's release, Capcom announces that they're going to be doing special edition releases of the game. In the form of, I think they did 2 special edition releases. They did one at retail and they did one on their website. The one at retail was called the Zombrex edition. I think it retailed for about $80 US, if I remember correctly. And depending upon which version, meaning you got the Xbox 360 or the PS3 version of it, depending upon what you've got in it. The Xbox 360, they actually released specifications leading up to the release of Dead Rising 2, this mini-series called Dead Rising Sun, which was directed by Kenji Inafune, who was the producer of at Capcom at the time, which basically detailed the zombie outbreak in a live-action story. At that time, there were a few video games that were doing live-action series to lead up to the release of their games. That was one of them. The other one I can think of off the top of my head was Alan Wake actually did a live-action short series before the release of the Alan Wake game, which I liked. So Dead Rising Sun was available, and they were releasing that up to the release of Dead Rising 2. But it was only on Xbox Live. Only Xbox Live people could watch it, could download it. And only the Xbox 360 version of the Zombrex edition actually came with it on disc. So immediately I was thinking to myself, well, looks like the Xbox 360 version is going to be the better version of the game for several reasons. The major one probably being, and this is no joke, the major one probably being that, how do I put this? They're going to be also releasing an exclusive prequel game for Dead Rising 2. And it's only going to be on the Xbox 360. And that game's statistics will tie into, you can create a character and move it on. So there was another announcement about that. Just before Dead Rising 2's release, Capcom released a game to Xbox Live Arcade called Dead Rising Case Zero. And it was basically a prequel story that introduced Chuck Green and his daughter Katie to basically show what happened to them before they made it to Fortune City. That they were in a border town or something like that. And on the way to Fortune City, there was an outbreak, and they have so many hours basically to survive to find a way to get to Fortune City. Immediately, a lot of people, when they found out about this and when it got released, cried foul, saying that they were charging 400 Microsoft points, which is about a little bit around $5 or so, for what was essentially a demo. And they got this whole conversation started that should they charge for demos? Well, immediately, I'm just going to say this. Dead Rising 2 Case Zero was not a demo. I cannot stress this enough. Dead Rising 2 Case Zero was not a demo. Any conversation about equating it to a paid demo is basically an equation by an idiot. It was a completely different game. The fact that your character could, some character stats could carry over between your saves is irrelevant. You can do that nowadays with any retail game, Dead Space 3, for example. If you had a save from Dead Space 2 or Mass Effect, would net you a special armor in Dead Space 3. That doesn't mean that Dead Space 2 is a demo for Dead Space 3, or Mass Effect 3 was a demo for Dead Space 3. That kind of conversation is stupid. If you want to call it anything, you can call Case Zero one of two things. One, a mini game, or a smaller, independent game, something like that. Kind of like, I don't know. Granted, this was released after the fact, but Alan Wake's American Nightmare was an Xbox Live Arcade release after Alan Wake. If you reversed it, basically, it's along that same type of thing. Or you could call it DLC. That's what I was calling it at the time. You can consider it standalone DLC. I mean, nowadays we buy DLC stuff, further expansions, further stories, and things like that all the time, and download them. At the time, I was I kind of think this is a bit of an unfair equation now, because Case Zero was its own standalone game. It did, so calling it DLC was probably not the best term, but it certainly was not a demo. So anybody who made that kind of conversation, if you look back and you're probably thinking about and you see some stuff around 2010 for paid demos and stuff, they're all talking about that. And anybody who even brings up that argument is, as far as I'm concerned, is a complete idiot. Because didn't know what they were talking about. Having played Case Zero, I can tell you this: it's no demo. So I picked up Case Zero, I think day one. I actually was able to get all the achievements in it. I thought it was a fun game. I mean, I think in real time, it still had the countdown clock. It still worked in real time. Probably game time on it was about 2 hours. In which case you did have some missions to complete. You had some side stories to complete, and there were people to rescue. It was a lot more convenient. They did fix a lot of the problems that people were having with rescue and with rescuing people. So it was a lot more convenient to rescue people in Dead Rising Case Zero than it was in the original Dead Rising game. And they also had, it ended with a psychopath battle, which I thought was cool. It was a cool way to cap off the game. Like the story a lot, and at the very end of it, you can level up your character to level 5 and bring him into Dead Rising 2 when that came out. So I pick up the Zombrex edition day one on the Xbox 360 because I intend to carry my Case Zero character over to Dead Rising 2 when the game comes out. It actually was one of the first unboxings that I did on my site, and probably one of my highest viewed early videos on my YouTube channel. So I can't remember exactly, but that video actually did quite well internationally. A lot of people, even to this day, my hit count on that video was very high. I never could figure out why, though. That's like something that's very unusual for me. I can never figure out what it is about my videos that some people watch and some people don't watch. Even in videos where people say they don't like, my hit counts can be good, and in some videos my hit counts can be bad. I don't know. It's like maybe it's just the way YouTube organizes things, and sometimes some of my videos end up easier to search for than others. That's on YouTube as far as I'm concerned. I don't like that. But that was one of my very early well-received videos, and I appreciate the hits that I have on that one. I picked up the Zombrex edition for several reasons. One, the other version that they were doing, which included poker chips and stuff, wasn't including some of the disc content that was being included on the second disc for the Zombrex edition. And on top of that, I really liked the look of the Zombrex edition over that. It had a copy of Dead Rising Sun, sure. But you can get your own little box of Zombrex. It had a replica box of Zombrex. It was a very important in-game item. I just really liked the look of it and everything, so I was really happy I picked up a Zombrex edition of that game. It was totally worth the money. I sit down, I start playing it. In fact, I even convinced Disc Reader 117 to play it as well. And I started playing it, and it was kind of slow going at first, but I got used to it. I was really enjoying the way it started. I liked the opening where it kind of showed that Chuck Green was basically playing like these X Games type crazy things with against zombies for money because he needed money to buy Zombrix for his daughter. Honorable stuff to do. Really made me like the character. I thought the environments were really cool. I really liked how they did I've been to Vegas on multiple occasions, and while they definitely scaled the city down, you could really easily tell, okay, that's Fremont Street, oh, that's the Strip, oh, this is an anagram for this hotel, this is an anagram for this hotel. I really thought they got the feel of Vegas. The casino layouts and everything else. I really liked it. I thought it worked pretty well. It was much bigger environment than Dead Rising 1 was, and I kind of liked how the way the developers chose to determine it was like the first place you start off with is basically a mall, kind of like the first Dead Rising game. And for the first in-game 12 hours or so, you're in that particular environment. The rest of the environment isn't open to you. And very quickly, after those 12 hours are up, then the game chooses to open up the rest of the city to you, and you can just see how well it's, everything was very detailed. Like they had all, they had like their own, like even not just the big environments, but the small environments on the Strip, like the chapel and the strip club and stuff like that. And they had vendors and stuff, and a candy shop, I think. All kinds of heavy detail. There was a fountain. There were all kinds of just fun stuff to screw around with. There were still load times, which kind of stunk. But other than that, it would have been better if it was a seamless experience. But I'll get into that later. But other than that, it was still fun to screw around with. And after I got the hang of it, finally, I really found myself enjoying the game. I was doing everything I could to rescue people. I was trying to get people rescued. I was trying to complete as much as I could within the game's confines. And I just ended up stopping. The way I figured it, the game was going to work, like I had 72 hours again, and I've got to beat the game within those 72 hours and rescue as many people as I can and complete all the missions. And at the end of the missions, I'll either get an overtime or the game will end after those 72 hours. Well, Dead Rising threw me a bit of a curveball. The way that game worked was that you do have 72 hours to complete your missions, but at the end of the 72 hours, you get an overtime, but it's not really an overtime. You get another 24 hours. Something botches, and you get another 24 hours to play around with more missions to complete. The difference is that the zombies are now stronger. Well, some of the zombies are now stronger. They had invented this kind of toxin or gas or something that increased the strength of the zombies, which made them tougher for the military to take out. And I kind of thought, I didn't really know where to go from there, and I really didn't want to play any further. And I kind of thought, well, I think I did pretty well up to this point. I just stopped playing. Other games were kind of hearkening to me. And for some odd reason, I never picked the game back up. I remembered getting stuck a few times in the game, particularly during the twins fight. I tried to get Disc Reader 117 to pick up a copy of the game, and he did. And unfortunately, co-oping with me, kind of like I had this problem in Borderlands with him as well. You couldn't really get a level 1 player to really give you that much help, unfortunately. Even in certain, for certain fights, you basically be protecting them the whole time. They're not really, you can't really, sometimes in games where you get a second player, whether they're good or not, they'll at least be able to help you out. Dead Rising, not so much. The co-op player, unless they're about the same level as you or stronger, can't really help you out that much. You'll probably spend most of your time saving them, which was very disappointing. But that having been said, Disc Reader did get me a few achievements because I did revive him and stuff. So I do owe him that at least. Anyways, what happened after that? I did finally, at that point I kind of figured, okay, this game is just going to get impossible to beat at this point. So I kind of put it away and I shelved it. And unfortunately, that's kind of where it stood for me for quite a while. I went to E3 in 2011, and I do remember after that, up to that point, I remember my questions about the first game were never really answered. Capcom did eventually release a new version of the original, a remake of the original Dead Rising game called Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop or something like that. on the Nintendo Wii. But unfortunately, due to the limitations of the Wii, it wasn't a very good version because it couldn't have as many zombies and it couldn't be as detailed as the Xbox version was, basically. So I never really picked it up. As for Dead Rising 2, I enjoyed it quite a bit, except for the points where it got really difficult, or I get stuck. And the save system in that game is not really conductive. Nowadays we have auto checkpoints and save slots and multiple different save slots and stuff. For Dead Rising and Dead Rising 2, for the original Dead Rising, you only had one save slot. For Dead Rising 2, you had 3. That was it. And even though you could auto-save only at the points of new missions starting off, you could not there were no other autosaves basically in the game. And there was a lot of traversal. It was a big environment. So you had to be really, really well versed on where the bathrooms were located in the environments. The only place you could save were the bathrooms. And I remembered writing an article at around that time after having played those games and No More Heroes and stuff. I remember, and that article is still on my website, What's with Japanese people in bathrooms? And I kind of found out a bit later that apparently there's an old Japanese folklore legend about being scared in bathrooms or something. Like, sometimes Japanese people from their folklores are concerned that something is going to come up and grab them from inside the toilet or something. I think that's the closest I've ever been able to determine why Japanese game developers would choose to use bathrooms as save points. However, using the term "I'm going to go save my game" in exchange for "I am going to use the bathroom" does work in regular conversation. I know there are some people that would use more derogatory terms, which I will not recite, but if you're trying to come up with a term for I need to use the bathroom, which gets the point across while not being filthy or disgusting or ruin anybody's good time, I'm going to save my game, I guess, could be your new term. That aside, my answers in that game were not really answered. Up to that point, I never really figured out what happened to Frank West or Isabella or anything like that. Shortly around that time, there were 2 things being announced from Capcom following Dead Rising 2's release. It was obvious that Capcom had realized by this point how important the Dead Rising franchise was to them, and they were ready to do more with it. By that point, I think probably less than a year later, they had made 2 major announcements. One, that they were going to do a direct sequel to Dead Rising 2, just like they had done with K0, called Dead Rising 2 Case West. And that this new game, which was going to be released exclusively through Xbox Live Arcade, would answer your questions about what happened to Frank West and stuff like that. So that was exciting. The other thing was that there was going to be a new remake of Dead Rising 2 that was going to be on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 called Dead Rising 2 Off the Record, which would have, I think it answered I think it was in response to a lot of fans' outcries, in that it allowed you, I think a lot of people were kind of upset at the time. It's like they wanted Frank West, they wanted to be able to play as Frank West again, and instead they were playing as Chuck Green. And while I liked Chuck Green as a character, I liked Frank West as a character too. And so Dead Rising 2 Off the Record was announced, which basically was like a remake of Dead Rising 2 with new environments and stuff, and you played as Frank instead of Chuck, and all the fun that went along with that. I never played Case West when it was released. I downloaded it, but it was like double the price of what... I really wish that Capcom had released it at a price of $5. Instead, they released it for $10, and I didn't like that. I wish they had done a 400 Microsoft points fee instead of an 800 Microsoft points fee. It would have been a much easier purchase to a $10 purchase is a lot harder to swallow than a $5 purchase, basically. At least for me. A $5 purchase is more of a throwaway. A $1 purchase is more of a throwaway. A $10 purchase is more of a bigger purchase for me. So I didn't download it immediately. I did, however, get to be one of the first people to play Off the Record because Capcom actually did have it on display at E3 that year. I was at E3 2011, around the time that Dead Rising 2 Off the Record was in development. And they did have a fully functional demo of a new environment that wasn't in the original game, like a new casino basically, or a fun park or something like that. And they said you can play around in like for like 10 minutes. I like that I like that a lot. You couldn't leave the environment, unfortunately, and one of the first videos that I shot at E3 that year was an off-screen demo of me playing that game. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring a cameraman with me, so it wasn't the world's best demo because I was basically one-handing the game while I was one-handing a camera. When you're at E3, weight matters. You don't want to be lugging around a heavy tripod. You don't want to be lugging around a heavy camera. I packed a light, high-definition camera with me. And I didn't bring a tripod because I figured, I'm going to be walking around for 3 days. So I chose to make those decisions. If I had had a cameraman come with me, which I couldn't do, I would have split the load between the two of us. Or at the very least, I would have had somebody be able to hold the camera while I was able to do demos. But unfortunately, that just wasn't feasible. Needless to say, I'm proud of all the amount of content that I was able to shoot during that E3, and I'd love to go back if I can get back in. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to. The fates have not aligned. I'm hopeful for next year, but the fates haven't aligned where I've been able to go back to E3 since then. But it was a great experience. So, Dead Rising 2 Off the Record comes out. And unfortunately, it was at a pretty high price point and not really a major incentive to pick it up at launch like the previous one was. So I never picked it up at launch. Last year or the year before, I remembered going on like a binge for cheap Halloween games and stuff like that around this. I think it was probably this time last year. I was looking around for some scary games that I could find on the cheap. Get good deals on off Amazon and stuff. And one of the games that I was able to get on the really cheap was Dead Rising Off the Record. I think I was able to find that for less than $20 off Amazon, brand new. And I was really happy about that. I have not actually played it, unfortunately, at least not the final version of it, because as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much just Dead Rising 2, and it's not considered canonical to the Dead Rising story. It's just Frank West telling a story. Well, if it was me instead of Chuck Green, this is what would have happened. But I was happy that I was able to get a copy for such an inexpensive cost. The other thing was that within probably about 2 months ago, or a month or two ago from here, Capcom and Microsoft released Dead Rising 2, the original version of Dead Rising 2, for free through Games with Gold. Any Gold subscribers in the last 6 or so months who have an Xbox 360 can download a free game through Xbox Live Marketplace. Retail, either a retail downloadable game or an Xbox Live Arcade game. It's different. They change it out every 16 or so days, but you have a free game to download every 16 days. Dead Rising 2 and Dead Rising 2K0, I think it was last month, were released for free as part of that program. And even though I had a copy of K0 already purchased from years back, I didn't have a digital copy of Dead Rising 2, so I decided to give it a download. I loaded it up, and I realized that all of my saves were still intact. Xbox 360 doesn't care if you play your games either on disc or on download. The save games will be compatible either way. And I decided, you know what I should do? I should pick up where I left off and try to finish this game. And I did. I picked up I started after using Games for Gold as like an incentive basically to finally finish Dead Rising 2. I loaded up my digital version of it, which I had gotten legally for free through Microsoft Games with Gold, and I started playing it again. And I picked up right where I left off, and I started playing. And I remember thinking this was a lot easier than I thought it would be. There was still one or two psychopath fights that I had to do that are required to fight that took me a few times to beat, but there was nothing that was impossibly hard. Even the zombies that were way powerful at that point were not that difficult to do. And on top of that, I was actually able to, for the most part, find a decent amount of weaponry. The weaponry had become easier to get my hands on, basically. So even though I was fighting psychopaths, the environments allowed me to have the weapons to fight them, either in the environments or close to the environment. So I'd at least always be loaded up enough to fight, and I appreciated that certainly. So it got to a point where I'm saving Rebecca, and I bring her back, and she starts talking about her peers, Frank West and Isabella and everything. And now I'm intrigued. Now I really want to see where this game is going. And at that point, we already knew who the bad guy was, or we had a good idea who the bad guy was. And I was ready. I was ready to make it to the end. The final boss fight in the game, I wish I could say was better than the first Dead Rising game's overtime boss. But unfortunately, they pretty much adapted him. They adapted the final boss for the overtime in Dead Rising 1. Same type of fight. The only difference was, I think I was level 35 at the time. I didn't have a spin attack to use. So me hurting him was all jump kicks. At the very least, I was grateful that I did at the very least have access to to some assault weaponry that I could use on him. But to be perfectly honest, it didn't really... Assault rifles and things like that didn't really do that much damage to him, unfortunately. And hand weapons and stuff were pretty much useless because he just knock you down if you try to get close enough to use a hand weapon. The only things that I could use really against him were spin dodges to kind of get away from his attacks, or and jump kicks. At the very least, there was at least enough healing items around that I could try to last long enough to get him into a pattern that I could hurt him. But it was a really tense final fight. It really was. And it must have taken me at least a half a dozen times to emerge triumphant finally. So there was that. Still a fun time, a fun final boss, certainly. And I really liked the ending. However, I didn't know which ending I was going to get in the game. There are certain things you have to do in the game, a lot more than you had to do in the first game to survive, to get the best ending in the second game. One was you have to give your daughter Zombrex every 24 hours. That was one of the stipulations to get the best ending. Another stipulation was you had to, I think, help somebody that you didn't like and give him Zombrex. I won't say who it was for spoilers. But I think you had to give him Zombrex as well. And you had to complete all the cases. You had to complete all the case files. That's kind of without saying. You didn't have to save everyone, but you did have to do that. Finally, at first when I beat the game, I thought I had failed or I'd gotten a bad ending. Ironically enough, it was the same thing I thought when I beat the first game as well. I thought I had gotten the bad ending, when in fact I hadn't gotten the bad ending. I had gotten the ending that would have triggered overtime. And that's exactly what happened. I had triggered the overtime ending in Dead Rising 2. So I got the achievement for beating the game, and then overtime started. And one thing I appreciated was overtime for the second game was just the same, pretty much the same type of gameplay as overtime for the first game. It was a fetch quest. You had to search the environment. You still had a time limit of 24 in-game hours, but you at the very least had and you had a fetch quest, and you could screw around in the environment and stuff like that. At the very end, there was one last psychopath battle to fight, and he was much, much harder because he was programmed basically like the final bosses from the previous games, the Dead Rising 2 final boss, as well as the overtime final boss from the first Dead Rising. And just like with the overtime in Dead Rising 1, you had no health items and you had no weapons on you. The only tips that I could get online were just be at full health when you start fighting him. I started screwing around in the environment and looking for something that I could use to face him with. And I finally was able to find some weapons, not very good ones, but some weapons were strung around and some health items were strung around that I could use against him. And eventually, after at least a half a dozen, probably more than that, he was harder to beat than the final boss. But I was able to beat him, and I was able to end the game and get the achievement for ending the game. I like the ending quite a bit. And then the game ended. And I realized at that point, it's not over. I had to play Case West now. And Case West officially but unofficially picks up exactly where Dead Rising 2's overtime started. You're fighting a zombie of the boss that you just defeated at the end of the game. And then Chuck runs into Frank West, the real Frank West, who asks about Rebecca and offers Chuck the chance to clear his name and to figure out what's happening. And you go into an entirely new environment, and it's a cooperative game. And I like that. After beating the first game, after beating the Dead Rising 2, I decided to try out the demo of Case West. And I liked the demo a lot, actually. It was still very much like the Dead Rising formula. You had missions to complete, you had side missions to complete. But it's spiced up enough. The environment was interesting. It was still fun enough. It had some enhancements, basically. So, after about a week, I purchased the full copy of Case West, and I started playing it. I made it about halfway through, and I decided to take a break. And then a week later, I finished it off. So I have actually beaten Case West. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't the greatest thing I'd ever played in my entire life, but it did answer a lot of questions that I was hoping would be answered and that were kind of teased at the end of Dead Rising 2. It did explain what happened to Frank. It did explain what happened to Isabella. And at the very end, you have a true villain finally revealed himself. And it kind of ends with that. Likely a setup for Dead Rising 3. Well, by that point, we already know that Dead Rising 3 is coming. At around the same time that the Xbox One was announced at E3 this past year, shortly after the Xbox One was announced, Microsoft announced a whole bunch of games that would be exclusive to the Xbox One at launch. And one of them was Dead Rising 3. We don't know everything about what's going on with Dead Rising 3, except that it is in Dead Rising canon. It will take place in an allegory basically to Southern California. So the first game was a mall in the Northwest. Second game was an allegory of Las Vegas. And this new game is now kind of like a Los Angeles type, San Diego type area to screw around with. Basically like Grand Theft Zombie San Andreas or something, which I thought was kind of interesting. No load times. You could bring together weapons and stuff like that without the need of workbenches. And interfacing with Xbox Smart Glass. So you've got better graphics, you've got Smart Glass technology, you've got basically everything that we were kind of hoping for in a next generation game. Dead Rising 3 is going to be able to do. And I remember when I put down my pre-order for Xbox One, the clerks over at GameStop told me that they asked me if I wanted to pre-order any of the launch titles for the system as well. And I didn't know what the launch titles were yet, but they did. And they said you could pre-order Rise, or you could pre-order Forza, or you could pre-order Dead Rising 3. And when he said Dead Rising 3, I said, put me down for Dead Rising 3. I'm really looking forward to that game. I'm really happy that it's a launch title. I can't wait to finally get a chance to play it. And I can promise you guys that at the Xbox One launch, or around the time of the Xbox One launch, I will be doing as much as I can to get Dead Rising 3 footage and gameplay available on my YouTube channel. Because I'm really excited for this game. I will be picking it up day one along with an Xbox One Day 1 edition. And I'm really excited to finally get a chance to find out what happens after the events of Case West. So, I normally wrap these podcasts up with, well, what does the future of Dead Rising say? And I basically just told you, the future of Dead Rising is in the future generation consoles, the Xbox One. And Dead Rising 3 will be an Xbox One exclusive. In all likelihood, it might be a permanent Xbox One exclusive, but don't quote me on that. Microsoft is buying permanent exclusives for these launch titles in most cases. They certainly did it with Titanfall and stuff. So it could be very well that we probably won't see it on another platform other than Microsoft's. But I'm really excited. It looks like they have, just like what they did with Dead Rising 2 to Dead Rising 1 to Dead Rising 2, that they improved the formula with new features and stuff. It looks like, once again, they are improving the formula again in that they remove load times so you can go in and out of areas and you can move in through, buildings and cities and move from you can go from the highway to inside of a shop and stuff like that. And you can explore the whole area. Everything is open to you. That's exciting. That's really exciting. It'd be really cool to have an entire city to basically screw around with that I can travel through completely without load times. That I could find items and fashion them on the fly, like duct tape a chainsaw to a pole or a boat oar or something like that, and use it as a useful weapon and throw it. And you can make out when zombies are ripped in half, you can make out the halves of them. They operate. So I'm really excited. We'll see what the power of the the Xbox One can do with this game. And that's the future right now. That's what we have to look forward to, is Dead Rising 3. What's going to happen after that game? Well, we're going to have to see. I'll have to play Dead Rising 3 and give my review of it before I can say what do I think is coming next. It's obvious that based upon what I saw from the end of Case West, Frank West is still alive. Chuck Green is still alive. They may end up coming back in this new game. That'd be nice to see. It'd be nice to see what happened to Katie and stuff. I also want to see what happened to Isabella. I also want to see who this new villain is and if we're going to finally be able to defeat this person. And, if they're going to make an appearance in this new game and what we can do to stop them. It's all really exciting. So that's my podcast on Dead Rising. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I'd like to say Happy Halloween to all of you guys who may be interested in it. If you want to play something scary, look no further. I hope you guys all enjoy your Halloween, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Over and out.